Hello, everyone, and welcome to CRTV 131 Contemporary American Cinema, class number 9. And got some great stuff today. Tim Burton, the Coen Brothers, and Paul Thomas Anderson, lots of great stuff, Johnny Depp. So let's get started. Tim Burton, first up. Most of you probably know Tim Burton. Maybe you didn't know too many directors before taking this class. But aside from maybe some of the famous ones like Quentin Tarantino, maybe Steven Spielberg, and very likely Tim Burton. And he's a local lad, grew up in Burbank in the San Fernando Valley. He studied animation at Cal Arts, which was founded by the Disney family as a way to get trained young people, artists, to work on Disney animated films and things like that. So they founded Cal Arts, I think, in the 1960s or 1970s, and that was going to be a pathway to possibly working in animation at Disneyland, at Disney Studios. And that's kind of what happened with Tim Burton. He's a big fan of old horror movies. Not just Dracula and Frankenstein and that sort of thing, but also some of the wonderful British movies that came out of the 1950s and 1960s. And so a lot of his films reflect that sensibility. He has worked with Johnny Depp 9 times by my count. I might be one off, but I think about 9 times. And composer Danny Elfman 19 times. And maybe you don't know Danny Elfman, but if you're of a certain generation like I am, I was a big fan of Oingo Boingo, and Danny was their lead singer and composer and all of that. So big fan of Danny Elfman. Used to go to the Oingo Boingo Halloween party, show, concert at Irvine Meadows every year. So anyway, great stuff from Danny Elfman. And so sometimes we talk about how many times people have collaborated. That's a lot by any standard with Johnny Depp, 9 times. I don't think that Martin Scorsese has worked with De Niro maybe about 9 times, but that's a lot. One of the other things that we will notice is sometimes it's the behind the scenes people that have collaborated the most with a director. And I would imagine that Steven Spielberg has worked with John Williams, probably closing in on 20 or 25 times. And Martin Scorsese has worked with his editor, Thelma Schoonmaker, quite a few times, up in the teens, that's for sure. So sometimes the pairings are with actors, noted actors, but sometimes they're with editors and scorers and set designers and people like that. You get a crew that you like to work with, you trust them and their judgment, and it makes things just very easy to round everybody up for a new movie. Some films in chronological order from Tim Burton, starting with Beetlejuice. Actually, I'm sorry, there's one before that, Pee-wee's Big Adventure. And maybe you remember or have heard of Pee Wee Herman. And so Tim Burton did his very first film, Pee-wee's Big Adventure. But after that, he did Beetlejuice, and then Batman and Edward Scissorhands. And he was really trying to get his career going. Beetlejuice was a very personal film for Tim Burton, but Batman was kind of a big franchise-type movie. So if you're going to make your own sort of statement kind of a movie, you need to do those kinds of movies like Beetlejuice and Edward Scissorhands. And Johnny Depp was coming out of television. He was on a television show called 21 Jump Street. He played a 20-something-year-old cop passing for a high school kid in some cases, and he wanted to transition to movies. He's a nice-looking, handsome kind of a guy, and he didn't want to get typecast as the romantic lead and was looking for other quirky kinds of things to do. And him meeting up with Tim Burton was really fortuitous for both of them. They really kind of needed each other, just the way Scorsese and De Niro, right? If you're going to be a good director, you need a good actor that can fulfill your vision as well as good scripts and so on. So they were a really good match. And for Edward Scissorhands, some of the things we've been talking about this semester, a framing device, and at the very beginning of the film, there's a scene with a grandmother type played by Winona Ryder in old age makeup, and she is reading a bedtime story to her granddaughter, and her granddaughter asks about why is it snowing, and that leads us to this feature-length flashback scene. But that sort of frames the movie. And it's kind of an odd framing in that when we go back, what we assume is to when the Winona grandmother character is a teenager, it has to be 50 years ago, and yet when we see the movie begin, it looks like it's the 1980s, 1990s. So that's just a film being able to do that sort of thing. Poetic license, sometimes they call it. It doesn't really fit that we're 50 years ago or anything like that. So framing device, and we get a fish out of water theme, and that's a real popular theme, taking someone, in this case Edward, who is a construct of sorts, and he is sort of, I think we talked about this before with genre films, like a Frankenstein creation, and he is sort of new. He's almost like a newborn child, right? All the whole rest of the world outside of the castle and the lab where he was created is a whole brand new world out there. He can see it through his window down below in the valley below, but otherwise it's really brand new, and everything he sees, people mowing their lawn, backyard barbecues, it's all very, very new and strange and kind of delightful for him. And that fish out of water theme, seeing a strange new land through the eyes of the protagonist, is very, very popular. Movies even like Avatar, where we get to see the strange worlds of the Na'vi and all that sort of thing, Pandora, through the eyes of an Earthling, and everything is again strange and wonderful and maybe a little scary and kind of delightful. Sometimes in comedies, just with National Lampoon's Vacation, where we take the Griswold family and we put them in Europe, okay, and now we're going to sort of see Europe through their eyes. So the whole fish out of water theme, it's a good one, and it works a lot. Drama, comedy, sci-fi, and so on. And like I said, we definitely get the revisionist Frankenstein theme. He is created in a lab, and a lot of the stuff we talked about before about these creations, created in a lab. Do they have a soul? If he's killed, is that murder? With other kinds like robots and replicants and cyborgs and all that, are they slaves? So this is really part of all that, and sci-fi and fantasy loves to have these wonderful ponderings, if you will, of what is the metaphor, what is the allegory for all of this. So next film up is Ed Wood, and this is based on a real-life 1950s horror director. And there is Johnny over here, Johnny again, working with Tim Burton. And Ed Wood has a very interesting backstory. He fought in the military and all that during World War II and wanted to get into movies. And he just wasn't very good at all. And he made some of the worst movies of all time. Matter of fact, His most famous film, Plan 9 from Outer Space, is notorious for, on one list in particular, the Golden Turkey Awards, for being the very worst film. I don't know, number 1 or number 50 on the 50 worst films of all time. And he made these wonderful drive-in type movies that were popular in the 1950s, Bride of the Atom and things like that. Black and white, low budget, take a week or two to shoot, show it at the drive-in, and so he was part of that. He was part of all that. But when a book came out, the Golden Turkey Awards, naming it the very worst film of all time, it sort of made him a little bit famous. And Tim Burton, being a fan of sort of trashy kinds of stuff, and horror and sci-fi and all that, thought he was worthy of a film treatment. So Ed Wood did have a kind of his own personal peccadillo, which was he liked to dress up in women's clothing. So that is seen in the movie. It's kind of funny seeing Johnny Depp all in dresses and Angora sweaters and all that sort of thing. His sexual preferences were for women, but he liked to dress up as women's clothing, and oftentimes he just have women's underwear on underneath his regular clothes, things like that. So, and that's true. He also, in real life, became friends with Bela Lugosi. And Bela Lugosi played Dracula way back in 1931. The setting of Ed Wood is the 1950s, so this is maybe 20, 25 years later. And Martin Landau does a fantastic job as Bela Lugosi. Matter of fact, he won the Best Supporting Actor Oscar for playing Bela Lugosi. And some wonderful making of, and I've also linked to the actual trailer for the actual Plan 9 from Outer Space. And the Tim Burton one really bears a remarkable resemblance to it. And they were such cheap movies. They took like pie tins and put them on fishing reels and lit them on fire, and they could swing them over sets, little miniature sets of Hollywood and the Hollywood sign, and that would be the flying saucers. And it's just really goofy fun. So anyway, you can watch a couple of scenes or dig around and find some other scenes. And the entire Plan 9 from Outer Space is in the public domain, so if you want to, you can watch the whole movie on YouTube for free. So Ed Wood is in black and white, and I wanted to call attention to some other directors who have worked in black and white. Yeah, sure, 99% of American movies or even worldwide movies are in color these days, and we've talked about the rise of color and the fact that it took 35 years from the early 1930s to the mid 1960s for virtually all American movies to be in color, partly due to cost and some other things. We talked about that already. But a lot of directors today, and some pretty good ones too, they're all Academy Award winners, it looks to me. Well, Tim Burton hasn't won for directing, but all the other directors have, and they have chosen to work in black and white. So that's kind of fun. And when Tim made his stop motion film Frankenweenie, he got to make that one in black and white as well. And so that's a good one too. All right, back to Tim Burton. Some more films. Mars Attacks, actually based on a bubblegum trading card, just like baseball trading cards. There was a trading card for this comic sort of thing, Mars Attacks, with aliens and all that. Sleepy Hollow, based on the early American story. Big Fish, which isn't quite as wild and weird as some of the other Tim Burton stuff is, but it's really, really good. Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, Alice in Wonderland below, and I've got the link to the trailer for Alice in Wonderland Sweeney Todd, based on a Broadway show, and Johnny does his own singing. He does a pretty darn good job. I guess it's not enough that he has to be handsome. He has to be talented and a good singer as well. Dumbo, remake of the Disney animated classic, and from just a year or so ago, so that's pretty recent. And if you have Disney Plus, you can check that out. And Miss Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children, based on the popular series of books. I think they're up to 5 books in that series, and they're a lot of fun. And that's a Tim Burton film, but Johnny's not in that one. He's not in all of them, but he's in most of them. And I was thinking a little while ago about Johnny and really getting into character and all that. And it seems to me, I don't know how many other people have 3 Halloween costumes. You see people dressed up and in costume stores for the Mad Hatter. Edward Scissorhands is quite popular as a Halloween costume, and Jack Sparrow from Pirates of the Caribbean. So that's kind of amazing. They're fairly popular Halloween type costumes, and those 3 are Johnny. I'm trying to think if there's a 4th one or not. But yeah, that's 3 iconic costume looks. Of course, it's not all Johnny. It's the designers and so on, but still, 3. And along with Tim Burton working in black and white, he also has done stop motion, and it is a kind of animation. Stop motion animation is the full title, and they are little figures, like a doll, but they're posable. They're very posable. They have like a little skeleton sort of a thing underneath the padding or whatever. And so there are a number of stop motion movies, and I've got a link to that, I think, when we get up to Wes Anderson, because he's also worked in stop motion. So a number of directors have done that as well, right? Stop motion, black and white. Get out there, try new stuff. Next up is John Hughes, and he is a writer, producer, and director. I should say was. He passed away a few years ago. I don't think he was out of his 50s even, which is pretty young. At least it seems pretty young to me. And there he is with his with the high school kids, and he used a lot of these same actors and actresses in multiple movies. And this is from The Breakfast Club. And like I said, a lot of these actors get used in multiple times. At one point, they were acting in movies together, and somebody did a takeoff on the old Frank Sinatra, Dean Martin, Sammy Davis Jr. Rat Pack, and dubbed this group the Brat Pack. So you could Google that, Brat Pack, and you come up with a number of these people. His films in the 1980s, mostly set in high schools, except for Home Alone from 1990, and set the lead character's I don't know what he is, 7, 8-year-old little boy, Macaulay Culkin. But all the rest of them are set in the young person's world, the teenage world, high schools, all that. He lived in Chicago, so they were set even specifically in Chicago area high schools, usually middle class, or even perhaps a touch above middle class in some cases. Nice big Midwestern homes in the Chicago suburbs. And I have a nice link to Ferris Bueller's Day Off, my personal favorite of the group. And you can check that out. In Ferris Bueller's Day Off, we're going to get to see Matthew Broderick playing Ferris Bueller, and he's going to do a wonderful breaking the fourth wall opening monologue, and very enjoyable. Next up is Paul Thomas Anderson. He goes by P.T. Anderson. He's not in this shot, and he likes moving the camera, steady cams and things like that, and long takes and big casts. As we see this film, this shot is from Boogie Nights, which is about the adult film industry. It's R-rated, so don't worry. It's not porn, but it's about the porn industry from the 1970s. I've got a couple of links to some clips from that film, and some pretty good actors there. Julianne Moore is going to win the Best Actress Award in a few years after this movie. Philip Seymour Hoffman also, and some other people you might recognize, and even some people that are going to become Marvel superheroes and things like that. So you can enjoy some long tracking type shots, Steadicam type shots, and things like that from Boogie Nights. I think one of the reasons to do that, and at least certainly in Boogie Nights, is it kind of puts you, or we, the audience, in the film. And as we go into a nightclub at the very beginning of the movie, we're kind of going in to the nightclub, right? We go in the front door, and everybody says hi to us, sometimes saying hi to the camera, which becomes us. And we get introduced to a number of these characters in this world. And the other scene that takes place at a pool party where our young star-to-be gets to be, he's sort of introduced to the whole world of the adult film industry. Some more P.T. Anderson films. Magnolia, another big all-star cast with Julianne Moore and Tom Cruise and lots of people like that. Punch Drunk Love with Adam Sandler even. There Will Be Blood, The Master, Inherent Vice, and from about a year or two ago, The Phantom Thread. And he is thought of very highly, I think, in the film industry, and I may have mentioned before, I don't want to be too repetitive, but sometimes repetition is the key to retention. So repetition is the mother of retention. But it takes a while for directors in particular to break through, to be taken seriously, and to have their films reviewed by key film critics, and for Academy members to look at their films and maybe think of them for awards and things like that. I was blanking on Mark Wahlberg. I knew I'd get it, but yeah, Mark Wahlberg there too. And Burt Reynolds, a big star from the 1970s as well. Okay, anyway, it takes a while for directors to get noticed, Martin Scorsese and people like that. But once you get noticed, and once you get in the club, then just about anything you do is going to be noticed and reviewed and thought of and all of that. And so P.T. Anderson or the Coen Brothers or Wes Anderson or anybody like that, once you're in the club, even minor work like Inherent Vice, everybody's going to look at it though and think about it and ponder it and think if it's worthy of any nominations or not. So of all these directors, like I say, Spielberg's been in the club for a long, long time, but a lot of these other directors, they have only been in for a few years, maybe 10 years. There's Christopher Nolan, people like that. Anything they do is going to be taken seriously and looked at. And speaking of in the club, the Coen brothers, Joel and Ethan, two of my favorites. I just love these guys. They have a nice personal style. They have not really taken on big franchise movies or anything like that. They seem to be able to make enough money to let the studios keep giving them enough money to make movies, although it's a little hard to say. Their last movie was made for Netflix, so that says that maybe they were having a little bit of trouble getting funding for a Western. I can kind of understand that. But for the most part, they are definitely auteurs. People talk about Coen Brothers type movies all the time when they're referring to other television shows and things like that. So they've definitely got a style like Kurosawa or Hitchcock, right? You know, or Fellini. There's a Coen Brothers style that very dry humor, fast talking, often repeated phrases, things like that. Crime, usually, often done with a comedic element to it. Not always. Some of their movies are very dramatic and sort of dark. But I love this. It's not mine. I would be proud if I did come up with stupid people doing stupid things. But it's definitely the Coen Brothers description, I think. I think it's a really good description. And so I've linked to The Big Lebowski in particular. That's the film we would have been looking at a lot in class. It has a film noir plot, believe it or not. It kind of like a detective, a 1940s detective movie, The Big Sleep, based on a Raymond Chandler book with Humphrey Bogart, and the plot starting off with a very rich man whose two daughters are being blackmailed, and the detective is called in. And in this film, the Big Lebowski is not the Jeff Bridges character here. He is Jeff Lebowski, but he insists everybody call him the Dude. So he is the Dude, but the Big Lebowski is a rich man whose young trophy wife is being blackmailed and or kidnapped for ransom, and the Dude, through a series of events and complications, gets called in to help out with the ransom and that sort of thing. And this is Steve Buscemi back here in the corner, very nice, and John Goodman and Jeff Bridges. Really iconic role for Jeff Bridges. When John Goodman was given a star in the Hollywood Walk of Fame, Jeff Bridges showed up in his Dude Lebowski look, and gave part of the induction ceremony, and the crowd and the fans went wild. So there you go, the Dude, Big Lebowski, and I keep seeing these tallies of how many times is the F-bomb used and so on. I know Goodfellas, it's up there pretty high. I think the longer the movie, the more times the F-bomb gets dropped. The Wolf of Wall Street, Scorsese movie with Leonardo DiCaprio, was 3 hours long, so that gives it a little bit of an advantage over some of these other movies like Pulp Fiction and so on. So I don't know which movie has the record at this point. It's really kind of funny, but when you do research on these movies, a lot of times they mention how many times it's used in the movie. So here, I guess the count, okay, 161 or 292 times, but I don't think that's the record. Some other Coen Brothers films. The Ballad of Buster Scruggs is the one that's on Netflix, and that is causing a little bit of consternation, you might say, in the film industry, especially among theater owners, because that one and much more disruptive was Scorsese's The Irishman, last year Roma, and so having movies nominated for Best Picture Oscars that barely play in movie theaters is toward the end of the semester with a number of these movies with a very short theatrical window is what that's called. Anyway, No Country for Old Men won the Coen Brothers the Oscar for writing and directing. It's not very funny, and it's a really good movie, but I like to show The Big Lebowski because it has a lot of fans, fan clubs, gatherings. There are Lebowski fests all over, Facebook clubs and all that, and people have, for who knows what reason, have gone crazy for The Big Lebowski, and that it is a cult film. That's why I wanted to zero in on it, rather than one of their Oscar-winning movies like Fargo or No Country for Old Men. And Hail Caesar. I've got a link to the trailer. Maybe we've already seen the trailer when we were talking. Yeah, I think we already saw. Now, I'm not sure if we've seen the trailer. Maybe I better link to the trailer. I don't think we've seen the trailer to Hail Caesar. That's their last theatrical film, and The Ballad of Buster Scruggs, going directly to Netflix, is a Western, but it's a series of, I think, 6 separate stories, all set in the Old West. So I am a big fan of the Coen Brothers. Dig around if you like The Big Lebowski. I would say very likely that you would probably like Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? Why isn't Oh Brother, Where Art Thou on there? Anyway, Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? Oh, there it is, yeah. Oh Brother, Where Art Thou is probably the closest in tone to The Big Lebowski, I think. Raising Arizona, great stuff. I like their comedies, which definitely Hail Caesar and Hudsucker and Oh Brother definitely are. Okay, so that's where I am right now, broadcasting the cinema classes, and that does it for us for this week. Contemporary American Cinema, Class 9. Thank you very much for joining me, and keep up with your papers and possibly extra credit. Extra credit you can email directly to me, and otherwise we will be back with another class, another episode next week.